spend with you. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy.
A few years ago, I preached a sermon, kind of tied in with what we're going to be talking about this morning. A discussion that was held between two men and Jesus after he'd been resurrected from the grave. And it's a rather unique situation, truly unique dynamic that is found played out for us in Luke, the 24th chapter. So you may want to turn over there because that's where we're ultimately going to be. But as you're turning over, I'll lay out why I think it's unique. In the scriptures, there are any number of times where a preaching situation takes place, and it's kind of different than the ordinary one. And that's what we're going to see in Luke 24. And like I said, we've talked about it before. But in the 37th chapter, don't turn to 37th chapter of Ezekiel. There's another unique preaching situation. And that is that Ezekiel was told to preach to dry bones. Go out there and preach to the dry bones. You remember the old song, them bones, them dry bones? Hip bones connected to, and so on and so forth. Well, that's what Ezekiel was told to do. You go out and preach to him. Find another occasion in Acts 20. And Paul was asked to preach an extended period of time. And so he preached till midnight. And then you notice again, there's another time that Paul enters into the city of Athens. And they want to hear from Paul. So they take him up on Mars Hill and talk. He has the opportunity to preach to talk to the Areopagus. And he does so. All unique situations, given that opportunity. And preaching does afford an individual unique opportunities. And so this night that we're going to be looking at is one such time. Now, I was thinking, even as I'm laying this all out, I'm thinking of the various and sundry times that I've been asked to preach in different situations. I was asked to speak at a gathering, a political gathering. And I'm neither Republican nor am I Democrat. But I was asked to preach or to speak at a gathering of people, and I won't mention who they were. And I used it as an opportunity to present the gospel. I have been asked to do funerals for individuals that never knew, never claimed to know anything about God. And that was a rather challenging couple of times. One was for members of a motorcycle gang and going in and preaching a sermon, funeral sermon there. So you try to meet people where they are. And it was kind of interesting at one that as we were talking before the funeral, I found out they were, no pun intended, but they were fans of the Grateful Dead. And so I figured, oh man, how am I going to do this? These people are atheistic, but they want a funeral. Meeting point, the Grateful Dead. And so somehow, some way, I talked to them about the Grateful Dead and how it tied in with the funeral that we were at. So you try to meet people where they are. And you try to talk to them in such a way that there is a common starting point. Because when you find that common starting point, you have a greater chance of allowing you to speak and make the necessary application. A lot of times we try to force a situation. It's really hard to do. But find a common starting point. That's why I talk to a lot of people. And Linda was telling me the other day, she goes, "You talk a lot. You talk to everybody." And I truly do. I talk to everybody. And I found out this past week that what I had on my vocal cord is because of medication. Oh, I have a growth. But they go, "You know what? You don't have to be quiet for a week." Yeah. Oh, how wonderful. Because quite honestly, I couldn't have done it. And Linda and Adam both were talking about he's going to go crazy. And so actually, I was the one that deduced what was going on. And I said, "You got me taking steroids. You got me inhaling steroids." They go, "Yeah. Well, they can cause me to lose my voice." "Oh, yeah. Well, let's do this." So you got to find a common starting point. And then you'll be able to talk. Then you'll be able to discuss. So go into the 24th chapter and look down with me at verse 18. And one of them named Cleopas. Now, these are two men. They're walking back on the road to Emmaus. And the events of the day had been Jesus Christ was crucified. So they're walking back, and in verse 18, answered and said to him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things which have happened here in these days?" Now it's night. They're walking along, and another man attaches himself to him. They don't realize it's Jesus, and they wouldn't expect it. Because Jesus, as Randy pointed out, just hours before, had actually 3 days before had been killed and was buried in the grave. And now, several hours later, 72 hours-ish, walking on the road, never would ever have expected Jesus to be with them. And so they try to find a starting point. You don't know what's been happening, do you? Are you the only one? Look a little bit further. Jesus responds, "What things?" They said, "The things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people." Here's our starting point. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about what has transpired. And that's what we're going to talk about. But if you go back a few verses, look at verse 17. We were hoping. As they're walking along, these men are sharing. We were hoping that Jesus, that he would be the one. Well, they were thinking physical, and Jesus came to deal with spiritual things. But we were hoping. What do you do when you lose hope? How is it possible that you can lose hope? But these men were devastated. They shared their devastation with Jesus, whom they did not recognize. We were hoping, but now what are we going to do? He's dead. Our hopes, our dreams, our desires dashed upon the rocks. How sad it was for him. What do we do now? Where do we turn? So you have a lot of questions. You look at this discussion and you want to interject yourself into it. But let it play out the way that it will. Because it's really kind of powerful. So, yeah, we have lost hope. What are we going to do now? If they'd only open their eyes. And that's the same way with mankind. If only mankind would open its eyes, they'd see Jesus for who he is. But you know, in those 3 days, people didn't open their eyes. I mean, when you think about it, Mary didn't recognize Jesus back in John 20, verses 14 and 15. And in Mark's account, he pointed out that Jesus appeared in a form different than what they were accustomed to. But the bottom line is they didn't recognize it. Do we recognize Jesus? Oh, and I'm not talking about recognizing a photo or a painting. Definitely not a photo. Although in Utah right now, I was watching the news yesterday, and if you are between 25 and 35 and a young man with your hair to at least your shoulders and a full beard, you can pose with people and be paid $200 an hour so that you will look like a modern day version of Jesus. And so you can get inserted into family portraits. And Mike's well on his way to doing that. But that's okay. We don't know what Jesus looked like. We know from Isaiah 53, he was not comely in appearance. But for whatever reason, they weren't seeing Jesus. And people today don't see Jesus. They look at him, oh, he's a great prophet. He could not be a great prophet. And having said the things that he said, if he was not who he was. Could not be a great teacher for the same reason, if he was not consistent. We've got to open our eyes, see him for who he is. But let's look at the discussion. So we looked at verse 19, but look at verse 20. And how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him up to the sentence of death, crucified him. But we were hoping it was he who was going to redeem Israel. And besides all this, 3rd day since these things happened. But also some women among us amazed us when they were at the tomb early in the morning. Did not find his body. They came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. And some of those who were with us went to the tomb, found it just exactly as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory. Didn't you realize? You're only listening to part of it. So what's going to happen from this point on is that the prophet, the Son of God, Jesus, who is the Christ, is going to teach them about him. You let me teach you about me. But they're not aware that that's who Jesus is. It's fascinating. Let me tell you about me. I'm going to tell you who I am. You don't know who I am. You think you do. But let me tell you about me. It's kind of like a Ralphism. You know how Ralph, and I'm saying this in all positivity. Ralph has a unique way of looking at things. And Ralph presents them and you go, wow, why didn't I see it that way? This is the most profound teaching, I think, in the entirety of the New Testament. Because here is Jesus incognito, talking to two of his disciples, i.e., followers of him, who they think they're teaching him about Jesus, when in reality, Jesus is teaching them about himself. That's what I was talking about in class this morning. We really need to know the scriptures in order to teach people about the truth. We need to know enough to meet them where they are. And this is exactly what Jesus did. Okay, guys, I'm going to teach you about me. Here's where you are, and I'm going to meet you right there. They, on their part, found a common ground for which to teach. That's what Paul did on Mars Hill. He found a common ground to teach the Areopagus. That's what Philip did when he attached himself to the chariot. Do you understand what you're reading? The eunuch was reading out of Isaiah 53. No, how could I? And it was from there that he preached to him Jesus Christ and him crucified. So out of Isaiah 53, Philip was able to get to the point of the crucifixion of Jesus. That's easy. But also to get to the point of teaching him the necessity of baptism for remission of sins. I think that's impressive. But let's go back. Let's go back to this discussion. So they start telling him about who he is. Well, let us tell you about Jesus. He's a prophet. He's mighty in word. He's mighty in deed. He proved himself by various signs and wonders. But he was killed by the religious leaders. They couldn't deal with him. And they killed him. Now you begin to blend in just to kind of get the full hue. You blend in Matthew's writings, blend in John's writings. Jesus is the Word. The Word is Jesus. Inseparable. How that is possible, I've got to take it by faith. There are a lot of things that faith is required. Faith is absolutely required on our part, every bit of it. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Dan had us singing songs this morning about what awaits us. That's hope. We don't see it, but we trust in God. We accept it by faith. We didn't see Jesus. We accept him by faith. Oh, but it's a It's a well-rooted, grounded faith because of men like Cleopas, men like Thomas, who saw him, talked with him, over 500 witnesses. He's a reality. But yeah, he was killed by the religious leaders. They didn't like what he had to say. Some would argue it was a political assassination. Doesn't matter their motivation. What matters is they killed him. All foretold by the Father that he would be like a lamb led to slaughter. He did not try to remove himself. He could have called legions of angels, but he went to the cross alone. And yeah, I appreciate Randy as he surrounded the table and was talking and used a phrase that we are well acquainted with. Jesus did not tap out, and we would have tapped out. We would have tapped out. In Greco-Roman wrestling, which is taught in the high schools and colleges, there is that terminology that if your opponent gets the upper hand and you realize you cannot win, you tap out. The referee comes over, separates you, you're defeated, but you realize you're defeated. Jesus said, I'm not going to be defeated. I'm going to win. I'm going to go to the cross. And ultimately, I will be the victor. So these two men, we were hoping, but the religious leaders killed them. Jesus has to meet him there and teach him the truth, that the victory is theirs. They just need to open their eyes. And the same thing is true today. We need to let people know the victory can be theirs. You just got to open your eyes. Open your eyes. The ball, a baseball. Manny, for years, had a baseball up here that he gave me. And I would take it out every once in a while I was preaching and use an illustration. That ball's gone. But the ball that Freddie Freeman hit over the fence for a grand slam, that when the Dodgers were going to lose, hit the ball over the fence, grand slam home run, a walk-off home run, changed the whole course of that series. That ball was sold for $1 million plus. For a ball. It's ridiculous. But the point being, the victory can be ours. They didn't tap out then. They remained staunchly fighting. They won. $1 million, no. What Christ did for us supersedes that. And that is the free gift of God. So yeah, those two men were right to a point. Look at verse, look down a little bit further. And let's go down to verse 20. Go to verse 26. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things to enter into his glory? Guys, you told me right. But you also have to realize that the end was not The end was not in sight. Beginning with Moses, with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures. Jesus found the starting point. And from that point onward, he taught them about him. O men, foolish men, slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. So Jesus sets about to teach them about him. It was necessary. Everything I went through was necessary. Yes. He asked the question. He who has an ear, let him hear. I love this picture. Use it on charts a lot. The only problem is trying to get the lettering to pop out at you. But be that as it may. In verse 29, after the men had called them, we're here now. Why don't you come stay with us? So look at 29. Stay with us, for it's getting toward evening. The day is now nearly over. And he went in to stay with them. And it came about that when he had reclined at table with them, he took bread and blessed it, and breaking it, he began giving it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized it. And then he vanished from their sight. Boy. Whoa, wait a minute. Now I understand. Now I see you for who you are. Sometimes it just takes something little just to pop. Oh, now I understand. Now I can see. Yeah. Has that ever happened to you? Somebody trying to teach you something, then all of a sudden you go, hey, I got it. I got it. That's how I learned how to divide. That's how I learned how to do a lot of different things. I finally grasped the concept that they were trying to teach me. Before, I didn't see any reason. But one of my coaches said, well, if you want to know what your batting average is going to be, you need to know how to divide. You're going to need to know how to multiply. And if you want to know what your ERA is. Okay. ERA, earned run average. And you have to learn how to multiply and divide. And then you can see, oh, well, here's what it is. So what they had to do is they had to find a starting point for me to make it important for me. Now, the thing that I hate is that I took that knowledge and now I'm able to do mathematics. I can do algebra, I can do calculus. Because with that little bit of knowledge, I was able to grow it and develop it. And I tell people, I don't do mathematics. I don't like to do it, but I can do it. And I can do it sometimes in my head. Somebody said, well, what about this? I go, yeah, here's the answer. And I'll be doing that when I'm driving. And then they'll sit there with paper and pencil. How'd you know that? Why do people like numbers? I hate them. But I know them. Meet at the starting point. So how do I get you, if you're not a member of the body of Christ? How do I get you to understand what Christ is all about? We've got to find a common ground. Something that's going to motivate you. something that's going to activate you. These two men, once they came to realize, whoa, wait a minute, he was gone. But look at verse 32. Were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining scriptures to us? We might do it this way today. How could I have been so foolish? I mean, do one of those head slaps. Ow. That hurt. But that's what they basically did. They whacked themselves upside the head. How could we have not seen it? How? He was explaining himself. So what they do, they feel a sense of urgency. Verse 33, they go, we've got to go back to Jerusalem. We're talking about 7 miles. We got to go back, and we've got to let the others know that we have seen him. In the dark, my sister sent an email to us, and she was explaining that she was at the Oregon coast, and she had gone over there to see the lights and different things. And after she had seen him, she was walking back to where she was staying. And she said the light wasn't all that good. She tripped over a root, and she fell down and broke her humerus up high. Had to go to the hospital, surgery, so on and so forth. But it was dark, and that's what she blamed it on. I don't doubt that at all. But these men said, you know what, we got to go 7 miles back. In the dark, and we've got to do it now. So, what's that 7 miles? If it takes 20 minutes to walk a mile, talking 140 minutes-ish. So you looking at it, and so a little over 2 hours. They're willing to put in 2 more hours to go back and let everybody else know. But they had already walked over 2 hours to get home. Now 2+ hours to get back. We live 5.5 miles from the church building. We drive it, it takes 14 to 16 minutes. I know that now because we got a speedometer that tells us elapsed time from when we started to when we stopped. I don't know if I like that. But if I were to walk it, oh, forget it. No way. Let's not even hypothesize. But they felt the need and urgency. Let me ask you a question. Do you feel a sense of need, of urgency to share the message of Christ? That's what we're talking about. That's a takeaway from this. They had a message to share. And that message to share was, well, I serve a risen Savior. He's in the world today. I know that he is living, whatever men may say. I serve a risen Savior. That's the message we have. And what we have too is in the Bible, we have Jesus preaching himself to us. Here's who I am. Here's who I am. What are you going to do with me? How are you going to treat me? Are you going to share it? So you sit back and you ask some questions. Did they have care and concern for that stranger they met on the road? Oh, yeah. Do you have care and concern for the people you meet in life? Did they communicate the message that they knew with sincerity? Absolutely. Did they exhibit enthusiasm Easy for me to say. An emotion. Were they ashamed of Christ? I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his name. So we come back, and so are we ashamed of Christ? Do we share that sense of urgency? But more importantly, do we look for opportunities and ways to share the message about Jesus Christ and him crucified? I started out this lesson talking about talking. And that I wouldn't have to be quiet for a period of time to try to figure out what was going on with my vocal cords. And that I talk to everybody. And I do. I try to talk to everybody. And I let everybody know in time what I do. I try to help people. And I look at everything as an opportunity. But you know the sad thing about it? The opportunities are getting lesser and lesser and lesser. So I need your help. And here's how I need your help. For you to feel a sense of urgency. To have the hearts burning within you. And wanting to speak and spread the message of Jesus Christ and him crucified. We're not going to grow unless we do that. Randy talked about the building of the church building. And it's church building here. Been here a long, long time. Vernon Brown and others, they made sure it was here. And it's interesting to go and look back through the notations. But we have the physical structure. What we need is the spiritual revival. So hold this in your mind about the two men on the road to Emmaus. When they tried to preach Jesus to Jesus. But Jesus turned it around on them. And Christ taught himself to them. And that's what he does in his word. And your heart should burn within you. If you're here this morning, not a child of God, we'd love to sit down and study with you. Show you what it would take. Nothing more, nothing less. Just the scriptures. But maybe you've already done that. You need the prayers of the congregation for strength and to encourage you. However, we might be of spiritual service to you.